Welcome to the Commercial Edge podcast with me, Chris Webber. Come and enjoy a virtual coffee while I share my experience and ideas that could help you overcome difficult people at work. I share my thinking and insights so that you can find new ways to overcome challenges and gain a commercial edge and unleash the power of people. Welcome to the latest episode of the podcast. Today we're going to be talking about when people do not let you speak in meetings. And it seems like a topic that will come up often because there are so many different scenarios when this might be the case, when you don't get the opportunity to share your ideas, to share your thinking, to share who you are and what you do when you're in meetings. And I want to unpick this topic of why we cannot be heard. What is it about these people that stop us from making our points in meetings? So I want to set the scene. I'm going to talk about how it feels. I'm going to talk about what it is that they're doing to you. And I want to talk about the effect, how it affects the meetings, how it affects the organization. I'm going to share a couple of examples as well, I think, that just helps bring it to life before I then unpick why it happens, what could be happening here, what's going underneath here as to what it is that they're trying to do, and then finally talk about what it is that you can do about it. How can you make yourself heard, be present in these meetings? So let's talk about how it feels. Enormously frustrating. We come to meetings. We come there with the intention of being heard, of participating, of bringing our ideas, and you leave frustrated, feeling like other people have dominated the conversation, that you haven't had space to say what you want to say. It just becomes sad and frustrating. It also feels like you're being disrespected. When I ask people, what is it that makes you feel disrespected? The biggest thing that comes back, the biggest response I hear from clients is not being heard, not being listened to. So if you go to a meeting with the intention of saying something and you are not given space because somebody shouts over you, somebody doesn't give you the opportunity to join the conversation, it can feel incredibly disrespectful and it leaves you feeling ignored. And who wants to work in an organization where they're frustrated, disrespected, and ignored? What does that say about the way that you're going to connect with colleagues, the way that you're going to function in the organization? And when you add to this the fact that there is physical space between many of us when we work now, because we're working remotely, maybe the connection we have with most of our colleagues is an online connection. What does that say about the organizational culture? And it's a huge lesson that as managers, we need to pick up. We need to learn about. We need to understand that if we're not allowing voices to be heard in our meetings, we're actually damaging the culture of our organization, not to be surprised when people leave. And it's because what they're doing when they're shouting you down is pushing you away. And if you're a leader managing a team and you're suddenly starting to trigger yourself of, oh, maybe this is happening to us, then you're pushing away the people in your organization. You are trying to, perhaps demonstrate power, demonstrate authority, but you're certainly creating a clique. Because often what I noticed is that in these meetings where there isn't space to speak, there are certain people who always make themselves heard. And that's quite sad, because now what we've got is an echo chamber of certain people who are physically inserting themselves into a meeting and pushing out other voices, making these other voices feel ignored, but then themselves creating this clique of echo chamber of people who are always speaking and are always heard. That is going to kill any sort of creativity across the organization. It's going to damage broad thinking, because we know from research that the best ideas come from organizations with diverse points of view and diverse perspectives. I use an example a lot in workshops where I show an image of someone sitting in a wheelchair and ask to challenge how would they feel if you were sitting at the bottom of some stairs. What I want people to think about is that in a wheelchair, stairs are a huge barrier. But if you're not in a wheelchair, then stairs are a good solution. They're a great way to move around buildings. Often we forget to include people who aren't as mobile. So if we're coming up with ideas, we will exclude those people who are in wheelchairs because we don't have them in our team right now. And therefore, it is no accident that all of our buildings that have been built over the last hundreds of years full of stairs. It's just a simple example of how we get into a thought cycle and an idea cycle, which is limited by the people who are in the room. Now, if you magnify that by your meetings, by not hearing the younger members of your team, the female members of your team, the people from ethnic minorities in your teams, because you're just not creating the space, then you are missing out on solutions that could be clever, innovative, dynamic, and that is going to harm business. And so you think about it, if you are someone who cannot insert yourself into meetings, who feels shut down by others, then the business is losing out. And it is almost your responsibility, your job, to find a way to get into these meetings because it will help you, it will help your organization, and it will help your colleagues. I got a couple of examples of this. I think it reminded me of when I joined a new rugby club. I was in my 30s at the time, so I wasn't looking to play at a massively high level, and I'd moved to the town of Northampton. Now, in the past, I was a professional rugby league player. I'd also played at a county level in rugby union and, had representative honours. So I played a high standard of rugby. But of course, nobody knew that when I joined this new club in Northampton. And I phoned up one day to somebody who was at the club and said I was interested in joining. And they invited me to go on Saturday and play for the second team. So I met up with a few people who took me in their car to a match, and we played this match. And I was a substitute because nobody knew who I was. And then with 20 minutes left, they brought me into the game. And afterwards, one of the guys was sitting in the car driving home. And he said to me, "Oh, you did really well there, and he made some really nice passes and ran well. It was good to have you in the team." And it was just such this innocent comment, but they had no idea of my experience. They had no idea of my capabilities, and it was only later, as I trained and got more involved in the club, that they started to, they started to see and understand. And I think that often sits behind some of the challenges of inserting ourselves into meetings, because if people don't know our experience, they don't know how good we are, then the automatic assumption is you don't know what you're doing and you're going to need my help, or you don't know what you're doing and therefore you have nothing to add. Just sit and watch and learn from the people that do. I'll touch on that later. But there's another example, I think, which is worth sharing, in that I was working with a client in the US. And so we've got lots of people joining video calls, lots of people in a meeting room as well who are in present, and quite big, diverse conversations. And there's a lawyer as part of the team who is very smart. She really knows the details, but she's also quite shy. She doesn't often come on camera, and she is much more thoughtful. Exactly what you want from a lawyer, someone who is in the detail, who knows what's going on. But she does not insert herself into the meetings. And in fact, when she does speak, when she's asked a question, it takes her a moment to think about what her response is going to be. And you can sense in the meeting that people want to move on. They want to rush on. They want a quick answer. And she wants to get it right. And I can sense that pressure on her to step out of her comfort zone and to kind of join this tidal wave of what's happening in the meeting without kind of compromising her own credibility as a lawyer. And I think it's another good example that there is a style issue. And so we'll start to unpick, why does it happen, right? Why do we end up that people don't let us speak in meetings, or that we can't insert ourselves into meetings? Well, I think there's three kind of areas I want to explore. One is personality types. One is around trust, and the third area is power. So let's talk a bit about personality types. There's an obvious one in this concept of introvert versus extrovert. Extroverts being people who gather energy from being in groups. So they enjoy being in part of a group, they're being part of a conversation, and they get energy from that. They're energized by ideas and by discussion and by debate. Introverts tend to get energy from calm and from silence. So if they're tired, they tend to want to back away from things. Now, it can play out in meetings in different ways, but if you're an introvert and you're not 100% comfortable with being part of a large discussion, being gregarious, being high energy, then going to a meeting led by these people could be really hard, can feel very, very uncomfortable. And there's a great book, which is called Calm, which is about this idea of introverts and how the world is built around extroverts. And some wonderful examples of schooling and colleges where we are challenged to work in teams or work in groups and collaborate to come up with ideas, which is counterintuitive for people who need space to think. And so if you're in a situation where there are introverts in your group, or you are an introvert, you may naturally find it harder to insert yourself into a meeting. And that's going to be a problem, especially if you've got extroverts around who just really want to dominate the conversation and want to join in. There's another element, which is, I think, is about thoughtfulness and reflection. Silence is a good thing because silence allows us to think. I advise this a lot when I'm teaching negotiation skills and when we're practicing negotiation skills. We need a few seconds to gather our thoughts. And too often we reward people who are constantly speaking, who are jumping in with their thoughts, who are thinking and talking during meetings, because they dominate the airway. They are, as they're speaking, they're perhaps evolving their thinking as they go along. People who need space, who want space to organize their thoughts before they speak, can find it tough in meetings. If we have to wait for even 2 or 3 seconds for a response, often that's enough for someone else to jump on it. And, there's a sense that in conversations, there are certain people who are waiting for silence so they can jump in. It's not that they're waiting for silence so that they can gather their thoughts. That's a very worrying element. And so one of the reasons why people can't insert themselves in meetings and get shouted down is because silence is not respected. That's also a huge problem. And there's also a confidence question. How confident do we feel? As time progresses, we get to more senior levels, we get to more experience, confidence can build. When you've contributed a number of times to meetings, you learn what works and what doesn't work. Well, that will change how keen you are to contribute. And confidence is not directly correlated with capability. Powerful thought that you could feel confident enough to contribute to a meeting, but what you're saying is rubbish. There are lots of people who have good things to say who just don't feel confident to deliver it. And be aware of that in meetings. If you're running meetings, if you're involved in meetings, that some people are talking confidently, but what they're saying is nonsense. And it's another way that personality can get in the way of contributing to meetings. Let's talk about trust now. What is it about trust that really matters? Well, going back to my story from playing rugby, I think it's about expectations of what to expect. Without trust, without um, reliable history of what someone has done, it's hard to know what to expect. And so when we're running meetings and there are new people around, new faces around, or more junior people around, you don't know what to expect, then it's easy for us to not create space for them. And it's just like, I don't know how good this is going to be. Is it going to be worth waiting for? Time is precious, and we're all so keen to keep moving on. Can we risk a poor reaction, a poor response? And sometimes people are just not willing, don't want to share their ideas, or they don't have any ideas. And I've certainly led meetings in the past where I've tried to include people and they don't want to be included. So this trust gap of like, I don't know if your answer is going to be reliable. I don't know if I can rely on a good idea is a problem that we assume. And I think that's one of these elements that can be connected to discrimination. That I assume because of who you are, what you say is not going to be useful. I don't trust what it is. And that's a big barrier around discrimination. And there's definitely a problem here that there are discriminatory practices that happen, that certain minority groups don't get the same space in meetings. And that, I think, is connected at times to trust. There's a message which is, oh, it's about discrimination, active discrimination, which I'm sure is true in cases, but there's also an assumption that, well, I just didn't think you'd have something valuable to say, is an argument that people might make. It's not a valid argument, but you can understand their perception. And I'm not about judging people whether it's right or wrong. What I'm about is helping you understand what they might be thinking and therefore how we can fix it. And if they don't have trust in the reliability of what it is that you're going to say, then they're not going to give you space. And that's up to us to try and fix. And then there's a final element, which I think is about power. Now, power could be connected to, I want to dominate this meeting. I want people to see how much authority I have, that I know my stuff, that I'm confident, and therefore I'm not going to give space to other people. It could be about control, power being, I'm going to pick who speaks here, right? I'm going to be the one who's in control of choosing who says what and when they get to say it. And that's also connected with power. But there's certainly power plays happening in meetings, and that's connected to politics too. Which departments are leading meetings, which departments are responding to questions. And I've heard clients in the past talking about feedback from their boss when their boss says to them, I expected you to lead that conversation. This is an area that you should know about. And that puts a lot of pressure on people because they're expected to demonstrate power and authority and political understanding and political awareness. And controlling that narrative, controlling who's involved and what they say, can be connected to a need to demonstrate power and authority. Now, I also want to throw in some other thoughts here. Two of them that I think might also sit underneath what's going wrong when voices are not heard in meetings. One of them, I think, is just generally poor meeting etiquette. The second, I think, is about insecurity of leaders. Now, poor meeting etiquette is where we just haven't thought through, or the leader of the meeting hasn't thought through how they're going to gather feedback. How are they going to make voices heard during this conversation? We are so led by PowerPoint and by slides. I get so frustrated by it. So frustrated. Many meetings are set for around 30 minutes. That's what Microsoft says we're allowed because it's what blocks us out. So we get this 30-minute meeting. And then people show up and they say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the scene with 7 or 8 slides just to set the scene. And in that 7 or 8 slides, that's going to take them, let's say, a meeting starts at noon. A couple of people are late, so it actually starts at 12:02, 12:03. Then you're going to get into the slides of the meeting. So if those slides take 10 minutes to go through 8 slides, which is quite quick, you've now got 15 minutes for a conversation and a discussion. And I believe the structure is wrong. I believe that slides are not the best format to share because you are controlling the pace of understanding, and the information that's shared is limited because of slide structure. It is so much better to give people documents to read. And if at the start of the meeting, as people arrive, you say, hey, here's a document, I'm going to pop it in the chat, have a look through it. When people are 3 or 4 minutes late, it doesn't matter because you've got other people already digesting information. You then say, I'm going to give you till 7 or 8 minutes past to read through this information, make a few notes and thoughts, and then we're going to have 20 minutes to discuss it because I've got this question that I need to answer. It's a much better format if you want to include other people in your meeting. And I just really urge people to really understand and challenge the format of meetings. Stop using PowerPoint to bring everyone onto the same page. And definitely don't send pre-reads. Oh my goodness, that is probably the biggest waste in most organizations because nobody has time to read it. And because we often recap it anyway, what's the point? Why waste my time? So encourage people. If you want to be involved in meetings, one of the actions you can take out of this episode is let's challenge the etiquette of the meeting. Do we have the right structure? And I also think that there's a problem with empathy, not noticing who wants to participate. Now, that also could be on you. Are you making it clear that you want to participate, that you have an idea, that you want to make a comment, make a thought? I think often we're guilty of just sitting back and waiting to be asked. Take some responsibility in leading your own destiny and being responsible for getting involved. But it's also up to meeting leaders to recognize and be empathetic and notice who hasn't spoken or who seems to be quietly just escaping this meeting, and I want to bring them in. It's down to you to be aware. And I think we're trying to do too many things at times. We're trying to lead a meeting, which requires noticing who's involved, who's not involved, and managing the timing, and share our opinions. And that can be quite hard to do. And so it might be worth thinking about roles within meetings to help make sure that other people are involved, and just calling out someone at the start of the meeting and say, hey, I want you to help me notice if I've not heard from certain people or people are keen to contribute and are not being understood. And I want to unpick this idea of insecurity. It's connected sometimes to the perception of power. Powerful people sometimes feel like they need to dominate. But often, powerful people don't feel that need. Confident people know where they stand. They know their stuff. They can defend their position and their arguments. And they're less likely to be closed to others who have a different point of view. They are prepared to debate and discuss and get involved because they feel that confidence. Insecure people often shut it down. They feel the need to control. They often feel the need to own the limelight, to dominate the conversation, to appear that they're in charge. And for me, often the more people try to dominate, the more I see them as weak. The more I think that they're uncertain and they don't want to give space to different arguments because they worry that they're going to be found out. And they're never going to admit this. But I think underneath the surface of people who dominate meetings are people who are uncertain about who they are, and they worry that their knowledge is going to be shown up. They worry that they are not the one who has all the ideas. You know, some people believe that as a leader, it's my job to have all the ideas and have done all the thinking. And if I'm not having these ideas, then it shows me as being weak. It's a lack of confidence on their part. And so to me, it shows up that we need to be careful of how we manage that. So proving them to be not confident or not strong is not going to go well. This is a personality who will challenge aggressively that kind of position. But it could also indicate how you need to communicate to deal with it. So it means you're going to have to slide yourself in a way that feels non-threatening for them, which requires a bit of subtlety. So what can you do? How can you insert yourself into meetings when people are not going to let you speak? Well, I think there's a few things that I would suggest. I think the first thing is to prepare in advance. If the reason that you're not inserting yourself into meetings is because you need more time to think, you need to organize your ideas, then I think you're going to have to take that outside of the meeting. You're going to have to prepare what it is you want to say in advance and prepare some thinking in advance. Because if people are not giving you the space to gather your thoughts during the meeting, then you need to find that space somewhere else. So just make some notes, 2 or 3 points that you think will be important to raise, or a couple of questions you want to ask in advance of that meeting. That's up to you to own that. I think the second thing is to persist. There are tools you can use if you're an online meeting to raise your hand and show that you're interested in contributing. But you've got to persist. If you go quiet, if you are easy to quiet because you give up, because you stop trying, then you're making it easy for them to ignore you. You're making it easy for them to justify the fact that they didn't speak to you because you didn't really want to. Be persistent. Don't give up. And if there's trust gap, if they don't include you because they're worried that they don't know what they're going to hear from you, then if you refuse to persist, if you don't push yourself forward, you are never going to close that trust gap. You're never going to demonstrate to them that you have valuable things to say. So I think persistence is a really important one. And connected to that is courage. You need to be courageous. It's not easy. If you're dealing with enthusiastic and vocal people and you feel like you're not in their league, it takes some courage. And this is where you've got to silence the voices in your head. You have a right to be there. They've invited you along. You've thought about what it is you want to say. You've got good ideas. Be courageous and go for it. Don't listen to the doubters the voice in your mind, which is saying, oh, it's a silly idea or whatever. And don't pretext it, for goodness sake, with, I know this is a bad idea, but because you've just told everyone that you don't even have faith in it. State your ideas, state what you want to say, be courageous. It's a cliche, but being courageous, stepping outside your comfort zone, that's where growth is. And you're never going to prove to people how valuable you are unless you are courageous. But there's a couple of things you also could do, which I think is helpful. And one of those is use other channels. If you find meetings overwhelming, if you find it hard to insert yourself into meetings, then take some conversation outside of that meeting. Gather your thoughts, reflect on what it is you want to say, question when you ask, the point you want to make, and go to one of the key people who's involved in the meeting and say, hey, I've done some thinking on this, and I just want to tell you what my thoughts and my ideas were. And by doing that, you're demonstrating to them your quality of thinking without having to force yourself into that particular meeting, without having to perhaps challenge a hierarchy in there or make, as a junior person talking to someone very senior. You can be seen as someone valuable, but do it on a one-to-one basis. It's a really nice way of building your credibility without having to step into a big, scary limelight. And if you do it really well, it encourages people to invite your ideas in the future because they start to trust that what you have to say is interesting and valid, and they may well call on you actively and say, hey, what do you think? Or have you got something to add? And that underlines what the point I made earlier about being prepared, having some stuff to say as you start, because if you're going to be called on, then don't then sit there in silence and say, oh, I've got nothing to say. Sometimes it's about building your brand. And people often ask the question of, do I have a brand? Well, the truth is yes. Whether you like it or not, people think and say certain things about you when you're not around. That is your brand. And the only choice you have is, do you want to control what they say about you, or do you want them to just own it? And so if you decide that you want to be seen as someone who is persistent, who, when they come to meetings and they've got something to say, will persist and will make sure that they try and get space, who is thoughtful and considered, who, when they contribute to meetings, it is worth hearing, and that you are willing to be courageous and participate with the team, then that's a really good brand to have. And that is something that you can take control of right now. You can build that by following some of my ideas and some of my thoughts within this episode. It's a scary place to be. People who don't let you speak, people who seem intimidating with power, can shout us down. Don't let them. It's in your interest to do so. It's in the business interest to do so. And it will give you confidence to do more if you can prove that you are valuable and valid. Don't sneak away with your skills hidden. Be courageous. Take some action. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'd love you to like it, to leave a comment. I'd love you to share it with someone who you believe could benefit from being better at inserting themselves into meetings, because, I think we all know this type of personality. Thanks for listening to the Commercial Edge podcast. I'll be back soon with another episode. Join me then when we delve into more difficult conversations. See you next time.